the idyllic villages that cling to our coastline. Known for their beauty and serenity.
Oh, it's wonderful to see that sailor.
Now destinations for our leisure. But once they played a vital role in our history.
This is amazing. I'm Ben Robinson, and as an archaeologist, I'm intrigued by our coastal villages because there's always a bigger story behind that idyllic postcard image.
I've come to Laxey on the east coast of the Isle of Man, 7 miles north of the capital town of Douglas. It's a place known for an incredible Victorian engineering wonder.
It is mind-boggling when you actually see the sheer size of it, and you're thinking this was constructed in the mid-1850s.
And it's Manx-born ingenuity.
With a tough industrial past.
It's hard physical labour. And then you have to climb up all these ladders. It doesn't bear thinking about, does it?
It was back-breaking work.
And yet still a village where fun was on the menu.
Victorian press reports actually suggest that this was something that was on the to-do list when you came to the Isle of Man. You had to tick it off.
There's a fascinating story to this village by the sea. I've hitched a ride on this fishing boat and we're tracking down the east coast of the Isle of Man in the Irish Sea. And I'm seeing sheer cliffs and rocks coming right into the sea. There don't seem to be any natural harbours along this stretch of coast, just tiny little coves and river inlets. But just here, I'm catching my first glimpse of somewhere that was a bustling port, the village of Laxey. I'm getting a closer look now at the village and I can see what looks like a fairly sandy shoreline here with pebbles beyond, what looks like a promenade, and then brightly painted houses clustering the front. But I can also see the village climbing its way up the valley towards the mountain behind. Laxey is principally known for its tourism today, but back in the 1800s, this place led the way in mining innovation.
Laxey's name derives from the Old Norse Laxa, meaning salmon river, suggesting this was a popular place for the Vikings to fish. Small-scale fishing continued here, and by the late 1700s, the village was a tiny fishing community, now called Old Laxey. And there are still clues as to how it once looked.
I'm on the hunt for Old Laxey, and I've just noticed this rather elegant terrace of late Victorian houses here. And the interesting thing about the terrace is it's been planted in front of what look like earlier houses, an earlier road. There we go, Back Shore Road, because this area here was extended out towards the sea to create a promenade at a much later period. But originally, the shoreline came virtually up to here, so these houses would have been clustering right against the tide. And I've just spotted one in particular that I want to take a look at. Now, this is exciting. This looks like an example of an 18th century Isle of Man cottage, a traditional Manx cottage. Now, it's been adapted and changed over time, but these cottages originally were one story, just a ground floor, maybe with a loft or an attic space above, and they almost certainly were thatched, and the thatch would be tied down to prevent it blowing away in the wind. They had chimney stacks at either end, just like this one. They had 2 rooms on the ground floor, and only 2 rooms, with a central doorway. Now, this is exactly the sort of cottage that would be occupied by a fisherman.
But at the end of the 1700s, small-scale fishing started to make way for a new and very lucrative business: mining. This began to reshape Laxey into an industrial port.
Just taking a look around here, the size of this harbour, the infrastructure that was built here, tells me that this village is making a lot of money, or expects to make a lot of money. This isn't a few fishermen clubbing together to build this facility. Just look there, the size of the breakwater and the pier here forming the entrance to the harbour. Look how big those harbour walls are. The warehouse over there, later converted to a factory. All this investment was worth it because what they were mining here was very precious indeed.
Laxey was rich in lead and zinc, and as the Industrial Revolution marched on, these 2 metals were in great demand worldwide. Lead had a wide range of uses, particularly plumbing and roofing, and zinc was used to galvanise the iron and steel that built our railways.
Small-scale mining for lead began here in about 1790, and I'm here to explore the old adit, that first piece of mining infrastructure.
You can visit this fascinating part of Laxey's history.
Now, the origins of many old mines lies in the fact that someone would notice mineral ore washing out of the side of a hill or down a valley. And pretty soon, all those easy pickings were gone, and people would have to start tunnelling into the hillside. And that's what an adit is. It's a tunnel, horizontal, more or less, going into the hillside. And they used to get people in, to get the ore out, and for drainage as well. And what they're trying to do is follow the richest seams of mineral back into the hillside, chasing them down into the hillside. And doing this, tunnelling through solid rock, is a back-breaking, arduous task. You've got hand tools, you've got metal bars, you're going inch by inch. If I look closely enough, I might just get a hint of where some of these tools have gone into the rock. I mean, just imagine the people down here working away and hoping that that seam carries on, hoping they've got a rich vein here.
Laxey had the raw minerals and metals in abundance, and as demand increased, the mines expanded. By 1822, the Kirk Lonan Mining Association was set up. 11 years on, the workforce was 200 strong, and the mine was making money. But this growing business that became the Great Laxey Mining Company needed an experienced manager.
In the middle of the 1840s, they advertised for someone who could superintend the works above and below ground. They were offering a salary that would put them above the temptation of bribery because they wanted someone trustworthy, and they were prepared to pay for that. They got Richard Rowe, a Cornishman who really knew his mines.
And Rowe's attractive relocation package included this rather impressive property.
Well, this is quite a substantial building. It's now a pub, but it started off as a house. Looks mid-19th century, got a Welsh slate roof there. Well, in fact, it's got two roofs side by side. That's to make the ground plan bigger. And I can see, well lit, there's windows here on this elevation. This is very much the back of the building. And in the conversion to a pub, there's an outshot here, so it's been added to over time. But the interesting thing about this building, the mine captain's house, is that it's in the thick of things. And we can see there's a blacksmith here, and in fact there's some bellows there, blacksmith bellows. But just over there are the washing floors of the mine. This is where the ore was taken out of the mine, where it was sorted, where it was prepared for being shipped out to be smelted to make these precious metals. And just looking around the end here, again, there's been another later extension on this side, but if you look up there, those rather elegant windows, and I wonder if Captain Rose stood at one of those windows surveying what was going on down here on the washing floor.
Andrew Scarfe has researched the village's history.
Well, this is a building that's gone through a few changes over time, hasn't it?
It has indeed. It started off as a small thatched cottage, believe it or not. Spent a lot of money on it back in the 1840s, converting it into what was described at the time as a mansion. It would have been probably the most impressive residence in Laxey at the time, yeah.
But there's still hints of the ornamentation here, and I mean the window surrounds, nice large windows, the door frames there. This was a place fit for a mine captain, someone who had all that responsibility. Who was Rowe?
He came from St Agnes in Cornwall. I think he was part of an already well-to-do family there. He was only a young man in his early 20s, but he came with mining experience to make the mine function better. Obviously, it was all about making money, so if they could make it more efficient and he could bring mining ideas with him, that was all the better. And of course, what did actually happen was that people he was acquainted with in Cornwall, like blacksmiths and other experienced people, did follow him over here to gain employment in Laxey. And there still are Cornish names in the village that are direct linked back to that time when the Cornish miners came over here.
And how else was he shaping the village?
He had his fingers in many pies in the village. One of the first things he got involved in on a personal basis was the harbour down at Laxey, which was little more than a wooden jetty at the time that got washed away. Now he then formed a committee to build a proper harbour down there. He built a flour mill in the early 1860s for feeding the growing population. And the harbour was useful for bringing grain in his warehouse, which he built down there as well.
He sounds like a man with a lot of ambition, a true entrepreneur, and the skill to carry quite a lot of it off very successfully.
Oh, he did, yes. He had quite a status in the village. You know, he was the man.
Rowe was certainly succeeding, working alongside the company's chairman and major shareholder, George Dumbbell. Laxey became one of the richest mines in Britain. In its peak year, it produced over 11,000 tonnes of zinc ore, a lot more than other British mines. Perhaps Rowe's greatest achievement was stopping the groundwater constantly flooding the lower levels of the Laxey mines.
As the shafts went ever deeper, getting rid of that water became ever more problematic. Now, the Isle of Man is rich in minerals, but it doesn't have coal. So in normal circumstances, you'd use steam pumps, steam engines, but not here. The solution that Rowe and the chairman of directors, George Dumbbell, came up with was ingenious. They commissioned, in the 1850s, the world's largest water wheel.
The Great Laxey Wheel is a true feat of Victorian engineering. Water's channeled to the top where it drops into one of 168 buckets to turn the wheel. This drove pumps that drained the flooded mines, and it increased productivity as the miners could reach untapped mineral seams below the natural water level. This 22-metre wide wheel still works, but it's currently being repaired. Local resident Matthew Boyd is managing the renovation project.
Oh, wow. This is a monster, isn't it?
Yeah.
What are you actually doing here?
Well, on this section here, we've got all the cladding, which is on the main spokes. They're all getting cleaned off. All the old paintwork has been removed, basically. And we can actually see the contrast between where we've actually worked to and where we're going to on the bottom sections. And we've got 60 of the buckets that we're actually replacing with a view to, in the future, there'll be more to come out. The other ones aren't in as bad condition as the ones we're replacing.
Now, when you're repairing a structure like this, what does it make you think about the engineers that first designed it?
It is mind-boggling when you actually see this sheer size of some of the elements of it, and you're thinking this was constructed in the mid-1850s. Back in the day, it would have been carts, horsepower and manpower, and it would have literally just been working through the night, working through the days constantly just to get all the work completed. And we're in a valley which is so restrictive for access as well. You know, it's a real feat of engineering.
It's a massive achievement. Yeah. And what gets me is that it's Manx-born ingenuity, and it had such a profound effect, not just on the productivity of the mine, but on the growth of the village of Laxey.
It's just a privilege that we're here to actually be able to refurbish it. It's due to be finished soon, so yeah, we want to just push on and get it working again.
The Great Laxey Wheel had solved one problem, but it created a new one. The shafts now went so deep that it took the miners up to an hour to climb down ladders to the working seams. A new innovation was needed. Peter Geddes is an expert on the history of this mine.
Oh dear, Peter, this is amazing. What have we got here?
This is a concept called a man engine, which was a very primitive lift. And this was installed in 1883. This is one of the few that there are in the country. And this huge 12-foot cylinder had a piston that moved up and down, driven hydraulically by water, so it's all free continuous energy. Attached to this are heavy wooden beams, and attached to them are standing platforms spaced every 12 feet. In the shaft, there are fixed platforms that the rod ran through. As the piston came down and the platform came down, a miner would climb onto it, and he could either ascend or descend the shaft by climbing off the moving platforms onto each of the fixed platforms. And the journey took about 25 minutes.
So it's efficiency, because you multiply that time taken to climb ladders by hundreds of men over hundreds of days, every day. You're losing thousands of hours just getting in and out of the mine.
Right.
It is incredibly ingenious, but my goodness, it sounds precarious.
It was. And unfortunately, there was a disaster in 1919 at Levant Mine in Cornwall when the man engine collapsed, killing 31 men. The mines inspector investigated, and all man engines in Britain were shut down, including this one. And then this led to a bit of unrest with the miners.
Right, because they had to go back to ladders, presumably. There's no other way of doing it.
No.
I mean, it doesn't bear thinking about, does it? All that physical labour once you're down the mine, and then you have to climb up all these ladders. It's hard physical labour, isn't it?
Very much. Back-breaking work, but it was a living, and it was all the men knew. They were accustomed to it.
The miners' hard work, combined with Captain Rowe's waterwheel, meant the money was rolling into the village.
And Rowe and a few others were keen that some of this wealth, at least, should be used to improve the lives of the workforce. A church was built, a working men's institute, a school was built. Now, unfortunately, Rowe's glory days were coming to an end. In 1872, there was an investigation, and it was found that £1,500 worth of wages had been overpaid. There was a sense that Rowe had too many fingers in too many pies to keep track of what was going on. His honesty wasn't in doubt, but his mismanagement was questioned. Rowe had to leave. But his legacy is woven into the fabric of this village.
By the 1860s, Laxey was flourishing. And the population expanded as workers flooded in to meet the demands of the mine.
At its peak, there was a workforce of over 1,000. And this meant that new homes were needed.
This terrace is a perfect example of these workers' houses.
You can see, look, all built as one piece, and there's a continuous roof line running right along the whole of the properties. And although it's on a slope, it's going up the hill, you don't get much of a sense of that. It's wonderfully symmetrical and regular. The doors and windows all in the same place. Each one of the houses has got this little gable end there, a little flourish as well. It's all rather nice.
But this particular terrace is special for another reason.
Now, these houses are built on the approach road to the mine. They're in sight of the Great Wheel. And tourists were starting to come to appreciate this technical marvel of the age. And they would walk down this street towards the mine. And that led some enterprising women to come up with a business idea. And here's a clue about what they were doing. Look, ham and egg terrace. That's because by the 1890s, it's said that every single household along here was offering dinners to visitors for a shilling.
Probably the most famous of these makeshift eateries is Brown's at number 1 Ham and Egg Terrace. Until 4 years ago, this was a popular tea room. Owner Vicky Hewison still runs a takeaway service during the tourist season.
So you're the custodian of this long tradition on this terrace of feeding tourists.
That's right. The building's got a huge history dating back to 1906, and it was set up by Harry and Lydia Brown, and their family continued it for over 60 years.
Do you have a sense of how hard this work was? I mean, how busy were they?
Oh, they would have been phenomenally busy. When they started off, they started in number 1, where we're standing now. It was so successful, they then extended into number 2. So it was 2 buildings knocked together. The ladies here, they were doing some days 240 covers, and they didn't have all the modern gadgets. So to produce that amount of food to the visitors, that was an amazing achievement. And we've got a picture here, which actually gives you a sense of what was actually served. Tea was obviously huge, boiled ham, chopped steak, ham and egg tongue, cold meat pickles, bread and butter, jam and lettuce, which obviously is quite a Manx delicacy at the time, I would think. Browns were obviously quite forward-thinking because they actually displayed what they were serving outside, unlike the other houses on the terrace. So very hard-working, very enterprising ladies.
Ham and Egg Terrace was playing a small but important role in helping to pioneer a new trend, industrial tourism. Laxey's Seaside and Great Wheel were the initial attractions, but it wasn't long before other enterprising villagers started to cash in on this new source of income. Historian Dr. Kathryn Ferry is an expert on seaside culture.
This is all rather lovely, isn't it?
It is. We're in Laxey Glen Gardens, which was a Victorian pleasure ground that opened in the 1870s, and it was the brainchild of a local man called Robert Williamson. This was a place where you could relax in nature, but also there were lots of amusements. So we're on the bowling green. We've come from the croquet lawn. There was the cycle track in the 1890s and the tennis courts, boating lake, bandstands.
It's amazing, and such a contrast with the heavy industry going on just over there.
Exactly. But Robert Williamson saw the opportunity here because people were coming to see the greatest water wheel in the world. But if they're coming, why not give them something else? And this is quite different. You know, Victorian press reports actually suggest that this was something that was on the to-do list when you came to the Isle of Man. You had to tick it off. And this was dubbed as innocent recreation for all classes.
So all comers welcome, as long as you can pay the entrance price, of course. Oh,
yep.
OK, so quite a reasonable entrance price.
And they offered refreshments as well, which was advertised as high class but moderately priced. So I think that sort of tells you that it is trying to appeal to everybody.
And Robert Williamson built an impressive pavilion as well.
This was a big refreshment pavilion that was first put up in the 1870s. This isn't the original building that burnt down, in fact, twice, but it's very much in the spirit of it. And I've got some pictures of what it used to look like. This was in the 1920s, and it's a kind of Swiss chalet style, and that's what it looked like inside.
I mean, this is a massive investment. They must have been sure that people would want to come and take it all in.
When this was established in the 1870s, the mine was still doing very well, so there was money to invest. In the next 20 years, into the 1890s, the balance started to shift between the mine and tourism, and they could see the upward curve of people coming to the island. So in 1870, there's about 60,000 visitors coming to the island every year. 1900, 351,000. That's almost a six-fold increase in 30 years. Building something like this just made absolute financial sense.
Yeah. By the late 1800s, mining was starting to decline here. Lead and zinc had been found in other countries. Many miners left the village to find work abroad. Laxey's mine closed for good in 1929. But by then, the village had already established itself as a tourist hotspot that boasted an electric tram taking the growing number of visitors to and from the capital of Douglas and up to the mountain.
The roots of our fascination with old technology, early feats of engineering, are to be found here. The Victorians came to marvel at the industrial wonders of their age and to enjoy the delights of the seaside. And we're still doing the same today. But this isn't nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. We're celebrating progress, innovation, and the achievements of this small island.